I am Seda Gilbert, and I am the manager for academic advising for SST. And I am really excited to introduce our panelists. And I would love to ask them to start us off by sharing a little bit about your career background and how you found your way to the School of Social Transformation. DeAndre, would you like to start us off?
Sure. All right. How's everybody doing? So I'm DeAndre Augustus. A little bit about my background. When I was a child, the only thing I ever wanted to do was be a police officer. My entire life goal from childhood up into college, throughout college, I watched Cops, the TV show, and like movies like Bad Boys and all those big action films and TV shows. I was really into that kind of stuff. So that's all I ever wanted to do. So growing up again in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I went to college, studied criminal justice at Prairie View A&M University in Texas. And as soon as I graduated from my undergrad, I went straight into law enforcement. And I did 6 years in law enforcement and I hit a wall. And it was one of the most depressing times of my life. Um, I felt very mundane. I felt like I had achieved my goals at this point. I had done everything I'd ever dreamed about as far as within my law enforcement career, and I needed an outlet. So one day, while I was in court doing the testifying on an issue, I met with a prosecutor, and the prosecutor just strongly encouraged me to go to law school. And again, I wasn't thinking too much into it, but did the steps I needed to do, enrolled in the law school. And from law school, I'll get into that a little bit later. But just through my process of law school, I opened up some of my ideas about the criminal justice system that I'm using right now to do within my research. So I go from being type A personality, big into this law enforcement idea, to dismantling it, to doing research that's dismantling law enforcement in general. So that's just a brief snippet of my background.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, DeAndre. So glad to learn about you. I had no idea. So my journey was a little bit different. I'm actually from Pakistan. And so I grew up in the 80s, and Pakistan was experiencing a lot of political turmoil at this point. And I belonged to a minority ethnicity, but I was being raised in what would be called like the imperial hub. So it's a different context. So I'm going to try and explain a bit. So basically what happened is that I grew up in a really political household because we were from a minority ethnicity. And, you know, we saw like my family, they were always talking politics. They were always trying to organize. They were trying to see why the system wasn't working. And so what I got to really learn at a really young age was that the people who are in power really, you know, they're not there to help the vast majority of people. Yeah. So I really developed a deep suspicion of the state and of the different, you know, parts of it that seem to be trying to control our lives, but only in a manner to extract from them. So this sort of really drew my attention towards justice and politics and human rights. And so I didn't quite know as a young person how to do what I wanted to do. But initially I thought that, okay, maybe if I study economics and get a sense, that'll give me the tools. And that's what I did. I studied economics in my undergrad. And when I really studied economics and understood sort of capitalism and neoliberalism, I said, okay, well, here I have an understanding of the system, and I even know it more intimately about why it doesn't work for the vast majority of us. But I still don't feel like I have the tools to maybe, you know, fight the system, I guess. And that's what drew me to law. And so I did law and I studied law. And as I was studying law, actually, I had a lot of mentors who told me that law, more than anything else, is a tool used to produce order, social order. So what you need to really look at is social movements. And so my trajectory turned away from the formal study of law and economics, even though I completed my studies, towards trying and understanding how social movements achieve justice through praxis, bringing theory and practice together. So that is eventually what brought me to SST and my PhD. So thank you.
Thank you both. If I can ask, you both touched on it a little bit, but how did you choose to study in SST? And in what ways did your education influence your career? Or did your career influence your education? I have a 3-part question for you on this.
I can start again. So that question is a little tricky for me, but I'm going to go with more so of my career influencing my education. And the reason I'm going to say that is I mentioned it very, very briefly, but when I was in law school, I ended up reading about this particular case, and it just struck me, and it did not sit right for me. And then the name of the case is Warlow v. State, Warlow v. Illinois. It's a Supreme Court case, and it talks about how a young man was standing on the corner and he observed some unmarked police cars drive by. And as soon as he saw the unmarked police cars drive by, he took off running. Well, when he took off running, that was enough probable cause for the police to go find him, stop him, rough him up, arrest him for any items that he had. And that simply was enough. To seeing the police and go in the opposite direction, and me being a person of color, a person who understood and worked in some of these low income areas, Black majority living areas, I understood that that's not an uncommon notion for someone to see the police and literally want to go the opposite direction, because you have no idea what they're doing. If they're in unmarked units, are they doing something special that could be dangerous potentially? Do I need to leave the area? Who are they looking for? I hope they're not looking for me. All these things can run through your head, and it gives you enough to want to flee the area. And for the Supreme Court to make a determination that that in itself was enough for police to then go after that person did not go well with me. So I started doing more research into the Fourth Amendment, and ultimately me wanting to change how the Supreme Court is implementing and viewing the mind of people in these low income minority majority areas is ultimately what led me to being here in the School of Social Transformation.
Thank you, DeAndre. So I'm just going to screen share for a second. I have some pictures. So this is what brought me, I think, my career as an activist or as an organizer. And these are pictures, just me being learning from different social movements. So on the first picture is me learning from this really amazing bonded labor activist. Her name is Viru Kohli. She just passed away day before yesterday. It was the deepest sadness for me. So she and her group of women basically organized to free other people from bondage, like badass, like nobody's business. The second picture is of a public gathering. Basically, this was a group of farmers who were organizing against the Pakistani military. Yeah, because they had been on this land for like generations and paying basically part of their resources and money to the military, who had taken that land on lease from the government. And the military was trying to expel them. Like, these folks being there for generations are now being expelled by the military. They all organized together and refused to leave this land. Yeah. And so the third picture, I'm with a bunch of women. All their husbands have been arrested because they were organizing for better wages. Yeah. And then in this picture where I'm sitting with a bunch of trans activists, sort of, they were organizing for a livable life. So all these sort of different groups, basically just coming together and raising hell. They were organizing for better wages. They were organizing to keep their lands. They were organizing collectives because they wanted to imagine a life outside of state brutality, outside of state extraction, not just state, but state and capital both. So these were basically my teachers. And with teachers like this, you can only land up studying justice.
Dr. Suhail, thank you so much for sharing those pictures. Oh my gosh, thank you. So were there activities, I think this may be a different way to ask this because of the way that you've come to SST. Are there clubs or organizations, internships or activities that as someone is looking to get into law, into activism, into policy work, into social change work, what different skills or competencies should people be looking to develop inside or outside the classroom?
All right. So the skills that I find to be most important is research. That's essentially what I do. So also, as well as writing skills, being able to communicate effectively. And I think that that's probably my area of shine. I'm not the best talker, but I feel like if you give me some time, I'm going to write something down and it's going to be incredible. People are going to want to read it. So research and writing is the most important skills, I think, for change on my level. That being said, community activism is also amazing. And if you have those interpersonal skills, I would strongly suggest getting down on the ground, finding various nonprofit organizations that speak to you and speak to the things that you're concerned about. People who are interested in like prison abolishment, find organizations like that. If you're interested in race-related issues, the NAACP strongly needs people to get engaged in those things like that. So getting in the ground and just working with these people, getting to know people who are also interested in these issues and finding ways in which you can help your community. And when I say your community, I'm talking about like-minded people who understand the issues as you understand them and want to change the issues as you want to change them.
Thank you so much, DeAndre. I think for me, the most important way, I guess, there are a number of ways, but things that I find really important are deep compassion, kindness, and critical thinking. Because there are so many ways in which we live in a time of the information deluge. So we have so much, and it's not even information, it's data. We have so much being thrown at us. And the speed and rate at which we are receiving all this data, we really don't have the capacity to process it and synthesize it. Yeah. And yet it's fundamentally important. It's fundamentally important that we are able to parse through all this data and understand the forms and structures that are oppressing us and the ways in which we can collectively organize to imagine a different future. And that kind of imagination will not come from the state. It will not come from people in power. It will only come from us. It will come in communities. It will come in pods. It'll come through struggle. And so what I've learned actually is a lot of learning happens in struggle, in movement, with togetherness. And so, I mean, we may not have a vision of a future, but we can make the road by walking it. And so depends on, to find the road that you want to walk on, you have to find the comrades that you want to walk along. And so a lot of it is finding those comrades. It's finding those issues that move you and how those issues are connected to everything else. I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that's what I have to say about it.
That's brilliant.
Thank you, Dr. Lava. I think one of the things that I hear often from our students in the School of Social Transformation is this challenge of feeling extremely passionate about topics, but also still facing the question from friends, family, well-meaning other people saying, oh, well, what are you studying? Well, what are you going to do with that? What jobs are out there in that, right? And so one of the things that I feel strongly about is that we are building skills in our classes, right? When you take research and justice studies, when you take JUS 301, what are the skills that you're building that then lead to being able to parse that data, being able to write that good paper? And then how do you take that outside to that organization and say, here's what I can do for you when I go do my internship. Here's what I know how to do already. And so that's, I guess, one of the things that I'm wondering, how do you see those connections and how have you in your own careers potentially made those connections? Let's just stick with alphabetical order.
Okay. All right. So could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, it was a really broad question. So it was, when you look at the coursework that we have, the coursework even maybe you've done, maybe you did in undergrad, maybe you did in your graduate programs, and you think about sort of this idea of what makes it a skill that is a market, I hate the phrase, but a marketable skill. And so when we think about, right, JUS 301, Research and Justice Studies, is all about how do I find, interpret, report back on information, synthesize. How do our students then say, this is what I learned how to do in this class? And where have you found that?
I can go first. Or go ahead.
Okay.
DeAndre.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I mean, to read, to write, to research, and to think, and to communicate with other human beings. I mean, even though we live in a world that continues to devalue social sciences and humanities, that continues to make us believe that, STEM or whatever the new acronym is, innovation or technology, et cetera, those are the solutions. We know this historically. All these innovative and new solutions have not solved any of our problems. If anything, we continue to see exacerbation of inequalities, of oppression, of war. And this is because we don't have enough people with critical thinking skills, with the ability to challenge, to question, to think, to parse all that data. And those are the core competencies you develop when you study justice. The pursuit of justice, understanding historical injustice, all of these skills that you learn in the justice studies courses, it will allow you to become a thinking, doing human who actually cares for the world. And like, all the answers are not at the back of books. Technology will not solve all our problems. The costs of technology always accrue differentially. The benefits of technology always accrue differentially. It means that, like, all of these modes of communication that we use, they're controlled by very few people. And that is dangerous for all of us. And we all need to think about this, and we all need to think about it critically. And we need to come together and find other means that work. And how will that happen? I think justice is more likely to give us an answer to that than computer science. Not to say that don't study computer science, please do both.
So I'm going to piggyback off of a lot of what Sarah said, and absolutely, those STEM fields very, very important. We're going to need those for that advancement of our society. But the issue that is being ignored when we continue those STEM skills are we're leaving society in itself. So we're not focused on what is better for our society, on that human nature. So the skills that social transformation is going to allow us to benefit into the society is, hey, that communication skills. We're going to be able to understand other people's issues and try to think of ways in which we, on that human level, are going to be able to address those issues and fix those issues from a human emotional standpoint, from a logical standpoint of bettering society. So those communication, the reading skills to be able to analyze, and that analyzing and understanding of a lot of those non-science things, those human nature things, just truly benefit us as a human race. And from there, we're going to your those jobs that you're interested in, they're going to need those skills. On the most simple level is that humanistic being and trying to understand the needs of other humans.
Thank you. So this is a really broad question. How would you define a socially transformative career?
All right, I can go first again. So when I think about a socially transformative career, I'm simply just breaking down the words social transformation, right? So looking at society, if you have a position, if you're in a career that you can take a step back and view it and understand what is an issue that our society currently has. And for me, when I looked at that, I said, there's an issue in the criminal justice field, right? And I said, how can I make a career that is going to address that issue, that is going to ultimately change that issue so that that is no longer an issue? So any job or career that allows you to take that step back, view an issue, and address it on that societal level, that's ultimately a social transformative career. You know, and it's very important.
So I think it's interesting because, we have social transformation and then career. It's sort of an oxymoron in many ways, but I'll try to answer. I think we need people to be able to survive and thrive in the world, and to be able to think outside of careerism and professionalism and the way neoliberalism deems us to be legible subjects. Yeah. So within conventional careerism, is this possible or not, is a question that your generation will probably have to ask more than the one before it. Because as we stand on the verge of world war and climate collapse, what does transformation look like? Can we give up state addiction? Can we give up our addiction to fossil fuel? Can we give up our addiction to the military industrial complexes, the prison industrial complexes? Can we give up these addictions and find another way to live? I think that's the question. And in those other ways of living, what does livelihood look like? What does a livelihood outside of a careerist professoriate look like? Yeah. And those are the questions I think that you can explore as you study social transformation and justice. Because maybe there is a way to shift the world in which we can imagine livelihood and sustenance in a much more holistic manner that maybe we're not able to do right now. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Fair. So another two-part question for you. First, what has been the most satisfying aspects of your work? And the second part to that, of course, is the flip side. What have been the biggest challenges as you've engaged in your work to date?
So for me, it's a little complicated, and I'm going to take off some of my human barriers for you guys. My biggest issue, I'm gonna hit that first. My biggest issue, my biggest challenge has been trying to teach things that I am very passionate about and have a very strong opinion about from an objective basis. Try to lay out as much information as possible about a particular issue and allow people to take a stance on those things. A lot of times those things become from a political standpoint. And again, I view my job as not so much to change people's opinion on that baseline, but to allow them to see everything about an issue, learn as much about an issue, and from there, be able to make your own opinion. And then on that flip side, my biggest satisfaction is whenever I'm able to teach something and I know I've taught it on that objective basis, and the overall group, the overall student body idea mindset has totally been changed, and they've all been transformed to my side, my viewing point, being able to recognize the issues from my levels. And it's just like, okay, I know I've done it. I know I've hit these students. I know they're understanding the material. So that's my biggest satisfaction.
I think challenges, I'll start with the challenges. I think the challenges are, again, immense, but the biggest challenge for me is also the biggest joy of both the job and the work all in all. I think the biggest joy and the biggest challenge is working with a group of comrades and changing something. It's just that feeling, just the feeling you get. I can't really describe it. I think it's something, it's like, something you have to really experience. Like, for example, like folks who go out and, like, when that, for example, in Georgia, voter registration was really important. And I was watching this documentary, and this person, like voter registration laws after the Supreme Court decision to gut the Voter Registration Act, again, like, there was a suppression of Black voters. So I think it was Stacey Abrams who was organizing to get Black voters to the ballot. And this one worker was like, even if I have to stay after my shift, it doesn't matter. I'm willing to stay here for as long as it is needed to get the voters to where they need to be. And so it's small things like that are also really hard, because sometimes they require personal sacrifice for the collective. Yeah. And that sacrifice is not easy. It's hard. But on the other side of that sacrifice is you having to accomplish something with the collective. And there's an immense amount of joy in that. So as a group, when you come together and you study any text that may be just hard, or texts have so many layers. So it's like an onion, you take one layer and the other, and then, like, you're sort of breaking down the layers, and you come with all that hard work, and you come to something, a truth maybe, or a complexity that you wouldn't have otherwise arrived at. And so the hard work is hard, but so is the joy that you receive at the end of it. So
I'd like to move from a little bit more of the abstract to very practical. We have so many students who'd like to go to law school. Practically, what does it look like to be in law school? And how does that translate after law school? So we have a lot of students who come in and say, I'm extremely passionate about immigration law, for example. So practically speaking, what does that passion look like in law school? Do you get to still be passionate about immigration law while you're in law school? What does a day of law school look like? I guess is the practical part of that.
So that's a little difficult question for me to answer, but I'm going to do my best. So will you still be able to retain some of those passions while you're in law school? I'm going to tell you absolutely, and I'm going to say even more so, you're going to find new issues that you have not even thought about. And that's exactly my experience, is seeing issues that I didn't even think about and like, wow, that needs to be addressed. I can't believe that we as a society are still sitting at this level field and we haven't made any changes. So if you are a person who is absolutely passionate or wants to make transformation throughout society, I absolutely say law school's way to go. You're going to find out so much more on issues, and it's going to make you want to do more research about those issues that you find out about. From immigration to civil rights to police issues to like human trafficking, even international human rights issues. So, yes, law school is definitely going to be an opportunity for you to retain your passion and to even go further within your passion. And the sub part of your question about what does law school look like? What does it look like on a daily basis? It's a lot of reading. And if you're in the education in SST already, you already do a lot of those readings. Now, the reading's going to be a little bit different, but a lot of reading, a lot of understanding, and you're going to use those analytical skills you've already been gaining within SST, and you're going to be able to apply it from that legal standpoint. You're going to be able to understand what the law is and how the law is applied and what issues are being held within that law in the way that it's being applied. So social transformation is a great baseline to further any person who's interested into going into law.
Yeah, I mean, I second that. I think, law reveals the structure of society. It's deeply, like, you learn a lot of minutiae about how the society, a state and society are structured. Law has so many forms, like constitutional, contract, torts. You learn so much. And you'll really once it's almost like, if you haven't studied the law, then it's almost like in many ways you are blind to that way in which society, those sets of rules, really minute rules that impact our everyday life, like how you buy something and actually what you're getting as a receipt is a contract, or how, what rules and regulations in which the minutest part of your life may be regulated. And sort of learning the difference between the different branches, the executive, the judiciary, all of that. Sorry, I'm in the library. Someone's phone is ringing here. But so, I mean, in many ways, studying law and SST as a sort of groundwork for you to study law allows you to sort of give you a historical background on how, the laws come about before you actually start studying the law itself. And the other thing I wanted to say about this is that the law provides you with a good toolbox to have, to really become a mechanic, I guess, to help people. So like when you have an immigration problem in the US, you need a lawyer, you need an activist, someone who's an advocate who will advocate for you, but also you need a lawyer who understands the mechanics and can really just get in and fix the problem.
I love that idea of a lawyer as a mechanic. It's a specialized craftsman, right? Who really understands the workings of these pieces. Thank you both. I have one last question. And then for our participants, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. And after our last question, we will open it up for your questions for a couple of minutes. And my last question is, what is the best advice you were given as you began your own careers that you would share with others who are looking to go on the same path or a similar path?
So this one, my best advice, and I'm going to tell you, I've taken this with me throughout my education, and that's going to be to find a hobby. And the reason being is because so much of the things that I study, so much things that I research, so much things that I write about are very heavy topics, oftentimes ending in death. Uh, it's that human death is so much on my mind at all times, and it at times can become overwhelming. So that biggest advice is to find an outlet, find something else you can do, find something that you're not constantly thinking about the issues that society is facing. You're not thinking about the inhumaneness of humans. Find something to just keep your mind off of those things. And whenever you're able to do that, you're gonna when you do some type of research or you're heavily involved in something and it's just that heavy, that outlet can be all you need to continue to do your work. So take a weekend off, focus on something else, and then get right back to it because the fight doesn't end. At the end of the day, you can find as much heavy topics as you want to. You can never stop finding these topics that are very concerning, very troubling. But, getting that outlet can help you to continue for your fight.
Can I ask you what your hobby is?
So my hobby is football. I referee football on the weekends, and my entire life is just dedicated to that when I'm not doing my academic educational work. So yeah, football.
Thank you.
I guess this wasn't an advice per se, but it's just like through my interaction with all the folks that I've learned from, what I've learned is to center hope, humbleness, and love. As long as they guide you, you're going to be okay.
Thank you. So we have 2 questions so far. Got another one coming in. We've got some great questions. The first question Leslie asks is, what major do you suggest taking in college to go to law school?
So I'll hit it first. My biggest suggestion for a major, it's going to be an English major, or even social transformation in anything like that it's going to be heavy on the reading, heavy on the writing. You're going to need to up your writing skills. Again, those communication skills are to the utmost of importance. And I say English because a lot of law school is writing. Professors are going to read a lot of your writing. And if you can get to a point in a very condensed fashion, hit everything that's needed for those points and explain it very well, you're going to be very successful because everybody's going to be doing the same readings. They're going to try to understand the same concepts. And it's truly how you're able to communicate it back to that professor that's going to put you above or below someone. It's that communication of regurgitation back of that information that because you're going to learn it. You're going to learn it, but being able to communicate it back to a professor that you understand it, that's going to be one of the best skills that you have in law school specifically.
I totally agree with, I think, DeAndre. I think you probably have a better understanding because I actually studied law, not in the US. But I think my understanding is anything that helps you develop keen critical thinking, analytical writing, reasoning, and reading skills. Because reading is also hard. I mean, we think reading is easy, but reading well, reading deeply, just understanding the multiple polysemic texts at multiple levels, and then bringing out that complexity in your writing also is really important and then developing those critical thinking skills. So I think like studying history, political science, social transformation, justice, women and gender studies. I mean, just, read broadly, be inquisitive, like read as much as you can about different things, about the world, current affairs, even the war, all of it. I think that the more broadly you're read, and I think actually law school applications also prefer people who are broadly read and well-rounded. You have to have some experiences also in life to sort of, I feel like just having an academic training, having a strong academic training is important, but having life experiences is also important, I think, as you apply for law school.
And to expand on that a little bit, what tips can you give someone who is going into law school, but English is their second language? So talking a little bit more about those skills that you're building.
Yeah, so tips, someone, if English is your second language, you're gonna have to practice. The American legal system is very centered around those traditional American values, and a lot of that is going to be very English centered. So practice, 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 read, write. Get people to truly not necessarily like bash your writing, but criticize you into showing you what your errors are, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and make sure you're able to communicate on an English baseline. Because again, unfortunately, with that European centered, old English centered mindset of the American traditional law school, English is of the utmost importance. And a lot of those professors aren't of that same mindset of social transformation. They're very traditional mindset. And if they're not able to understand, they're going to be very critical. So practice, practice, practice.
We have go
there
ahead.
are a few questions, but someone had a question about the war, and I just wanted to share this this quote by Howard Zinn. So you all can read it, but I'll read it for you. It's like, to be hopeful in bad times is based on the fact that human history is not only cruelty, but also compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. And if we only see the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us energy to act. And if we do act in however a small way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of small presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, it is in itself a marvelous victory. So that was just for the person who was talking about, the harshness of today's world as we confront war and genocide. But in terms of like, English is my second language. I think the only thing I would say to you is it's like hard work and practice. You just keep at it. Don't let anyone discourage you. I make mistakes today. I make mistakes in my writing. I eat words. My punctuation isn't great. My grammar is off. In my speaking, in my writing, it doesn't matter. You just have to keep trying. Lots of people will be out there to discourage you. Lots of people will say you're not good enough, but that's not important. What is important is that you just keep trying. And good things will happen. Trust me.
Pat asks, apart from law school, what and where do you think a degree in African and African American studies can take you?
Yeah. So it all depends on what you want to do. You'll be able to move your degree and to take the skills that you received from an African American studies perspective to anything. I think literally any type of career you want to be in, you'll be able to reach it with that African American studies. But some of the highlights that I think of when I think about that education, and that's both on the secondary level and on the collegiate level, you can work in what's called diversity and inclusion is huge right now, and it's being attacked from different aspects, but having that understanding from that African American perspective can help to help companies, corporate America. When we think about what happened with the George Floyd situation in that summer of 2020, so many of these corporate America uh, entities decided that diversity and inclusion was so important, and they're looking for people who specialize and understand and how to speak to the Black experience because of the long history of um, persecution that African Americans have endured. So these companies, they're looking for people who have those skills and who have that understanding. So yeah, I would definitely say any type of career you want to go into, and especially any type of diversity and inclusion.
I think obviously, like, there are a lot of community organizations, non-governmental organizations, both at the local, national, international level. When you have a perspective on African American studies, you have a very sort of a structural understanding of how white supremacy, capitalism, all these structures intertwine and work within the US and across the world. So you can use those skills in any setting. There are, like, you can work at the UN, you can, there are many other organizations locally in Phoenix, regionally in the Southwest, nationally, in the US, or internationally, where you could take that perspective and your skills would be put to good use.
We have 3 more questions here, and I don't want to keep our East Coast community members up too late. So I think we will end with these 3 more questions. Cindy first asks, and she writes, "Thank you both for sharing. I was absolutely wondering how you both maintain the hope when so much turmoil surrounds us." And I think Dr. Suhail, you already answered this a little bit, and strips us of our own humanity. On a more technical note, do either of you have any recommendations for graduate program focuses outside of law school to continue your studies?
Right. So I'll again go. So as far as the hope, it's just something you have to have. When you're into these types of careers, when you do this type of research, there's no chance, there's no point in time where you can not have that hope. There's a book, Afro Pessimism, and it's very much talks about the pessimism that's involved with a lot of African American ideologies, and I keep that in like my arsenal. And that's one of those things. It's like you can be pessimistic about things, be pessimistic about the world, but what are you hoping? What are you helping? What ultimately is going to be the goal or the end results of your pessimism? So keeping that optimistic mindset of I do have the ability to change the world. I do have the opportunity to address even this little bitty issue. And if I can continue to address it, even if at the first time I'm shunned from addressing that issue, be continuing speaking up, continuing, eventually you can get that snowball effect and boom, you're able to address it head on. One of the issues that I very much talked about at the very beginning is like that Warlow v. Illinois. One of the reasons that I'm so interested in that particular case is because when I look about Freddie Gray, that is the exact situation that happened to the death of Freddie Gray. But however, continuing to hammer on it, I truly believe that eventually one day I'm going to hit that Supreme Court level and I'm going to be able to overturn that decision, you know? So that's just how I'm able to why I'm able to keep my hope is because I know that one day I am going to be able to transform even the mind, if it's just the minds of other people and not even hitting the issue itself, but the minds around it, eventually that issue is going to change. Recommendations for graduate programs focused outside of law school. I'm going to say you have to pick your issue whatever your thing is, what are you passionate about? And if it's not on that STEM level, then the social sciences and humanities. There's going to be a program, there's going to be a professor somewhere who studies something around that issue. And if that's anywhere in America, you can go worldwide with it. But particularly speaking out in America, find a professor who talks about the issues that you're the most passionate about, and communicate with them, send them an email, challenge them on something to make their mind think, continue to communicate with them, go to a conference that they're going to be speaking at, a panel that they're going to be speaking at, even if it's virtually, find that program, and from there, apply to their program, and you'll be able to hit whatever issue that is most passionate to you.
Thank you. So for me, hope is in community. I keep hope because I'm always conspiring with my comrades, and we're always trying to do something, whether it is in the US or in Pakistan. We're all the time, we're in communication. You know, we're doing small, sometimes it's just writing a statement. Sometimes it's showing up for a protest. Sometimes it's gathering money to pay someone's tuition. Sometimes it's like gathering money for a funeral. Sometimes it's showing up. You know, there are a million ways when you're in community, when you have a crew, when you have co-conspirators, when you have comrades, that you can constantly come together and do things that you would never feel hopeless. Because even in that one thing you were able to do, just that one thing, that's one thing done, you know? So that's how I keep the hope, to be honest, because the hope is in the doing for me. I do it every day. Not a day goes by without that hope being realized through some kind of actions. And the other thing is, like, I think for me, always the focus has been people's movements. You know, I have looked for change outside of formative structures of law and state. And I've always seen hope in people who sacrifice with community, along community. You know, the US has a long tradition of Black and brown radical thought and communities. People like Ella Baker or Fannie Lou Hamer or Gloria Anzaldúa. There's so many. You know, I'm just saying names at this point. But I think outside of law, you could think of many disciplines. Like, you know, you could think about anthropology, justice. I did my PhD in women and gender studies, you know. So there are many subjects now that are institutional spaces of social movements, like ethnic studies or American studies. You know, they have a critical lens, and that will allow you to study, you know, the system in a more critical manner. It'll give you the tools that maybe a disciplining discipline may not.
Cindy also asks, sort of building on this concept of comrades and finding all these people, right, and keeping the hope, is considering the importance of community and solidarity in social justice work. I'm curious how you all have built your own network of colleagues and peers throughout the years, and are there any particular avenues we should consider?
All right. So for me, the way I've been able to build my network is through my work, essentially through my education. Honestly, I write, I read, and I go to conferences. And I'd say conferences, just being from that academic standpoint, conferences, you're going to meet a lot of people of a like-minded viewpoint. And they'll go to a session that you're talking or you're being a panelist on and speaking about a particular issue. They're going to ask questions. They're going to challenge you on your own work. And that's like some of the best conversations that I feel like I had on that academic level. And from those people who challenge me on my own views, my own work, I feel as though, like, okay, I'm going to continue talking to you about these issues. And that's how those avenues have been built for me. But for other people, the biggest way I see, or the easiest way I see you building your community of like-minded people, is go to an event, go to a protest, find an organization, even if it's not necessarily an event that's like a protest or anything like that, and they're just having a Christmas party or they're bowling. Those organizations, you can find them online, whatever, again, finding what your passion is, find an organization that's around that, and just go to an event, talk to someone there, and you'll make community through that.
Thank you. So I think for me, all the movements that I've worked with along the years, worked along, and even in my work, like it's not like I did not make a distinction in terms of that they are the objects of my study. I studied along people, I learned from them, and they're still my comrades and friends. So in all of those, like all of those pictures that I showed you, I'm still in contact with all of those people. You know, they still guide me. And we confer with each other. We confer with each other about the events of the world. We confer with each other how to organize and protect our communities. So I think the most important thing is to build relationship outside of this notion of transaction. Like, what can you do for me and what can I do for you, or outside of, sort of capitalist time and capitalist practice that reduces us to these identities, that I am an academic and you're a social worker. No, like we need to think outside of these boundaries and outside of these normative categories that are imposed on us. And we need to build other forms of relationality all outside of capital and other, other sort of really poor, or like, there's a lot of poverty when we reduce ourselves and say, okay, I'm just this thing. So we need to take all ourselves when we go into movements, spaces especially, and, build friendships that are lasting. And they are actually friendships. There has to be mutuality in those relationships across time and space. So if I went to, movement space and I spent time with them, when they were in my city, they could come stay in my house. So it was about building mutuality, love, and respect over time and space. So I hope that answered your question.
And Cindy, know you have a community waiting to welcome you in real life when you come to Arizona to celebrate your graduation. I hope that you know that we'll be here. I'm so excited to see you in person. Our last question tonight is from John. And he asks, what are some paths to consider where I could find myself assisting with policy development, but in a position that would not require law school? Currently, I work in law enforcement, and I frequently see the need for change in policy and law.
Other paths instead of law, if you wanted to work in policy, like I can take an example. For example, there's this organization called, I think it's Equality AZ. And so they work on issues for queer LGBT folks of Arizona. And they work on policy at the state level. Yeah. And so the way for them to do it is they work not through, I'm sure they actually don't work with lawyers, but they work with advocates and organizers. They could work with lawyers as well. That's not to say there's anything wrong with it, but there's always a way to work on policy as an advocate, as an activist, as an organizer. You don't necessarily have to be a lawyer. Non-lawyers also can learn a whole lot about the legal system, just by studying, just by reading, just by experiencing and listening to people who have been impacted by the law or have been impacted by the structures created by law. So advocacy, activism, organizing, joining non-governmental organizations that are working on the issues regarding policy that you want to work on. So there are many avenues to be able to, and research, like becoming a researcher. That's a way to inform law and policy as well. So there are multiple avenues to be able to influence law and policy. It depends what's your path.
So John, I'm going to hit you with that reel right now, okay? You go to a lot of these political organizing groups and you tell them that you're in law enforcement, a lot of them are going to look at you like, why are you here? And that's just the honest truth about it. So they need to know who you are as a human being. They need to understand why you're passionate about it. What are the issues that you see and how you feel as though you can address it. And that best way that I can tell you to address those issues is to write. Start writing right now. Start writing about all of the issues that you see. If you need to get them published, get a published writing at a newspaper, at a magazine, an online article, any of those things, getting work out there to address the issues that you are seeing from the inside that a lot of people may not be able to see. If you've got to do it anonymously, do it. I'm challenging you now to write. See those issues that write about those issues that you are seeing on a daily basis or that are troubling you right now. And if you need to, go to get into a master's program, get into a PhD program, and address those issues. That's the things that I'm currently doing. You know, I've been in those exact shoes that you're in right now. And I'm telling you now, write it down. Don't forget it. Write it down. If you have an opportunity, put it out anonymously and address those issues.
Thank you both so much for your time. Students and guests, thank you all so much for coming. I don't know about you all, but I have had moments where I've gotten distracted from my moderator responsibilities because I'm feeling emotional about what I've learned and what I'm hearing and my motivation for continuing the important and critical work that we do. I want to share two tools that we have at ASU as we close out tonight. Students, and this is for our graduate students too. If you have not been on Handshake in a while, I really encourage you to get on Handshake, look at the internships, the job postings, just the organizations that are there and that are available to you. And you may think, oh, well, they're advertising for political science or they're advertising for, it's a communications internship. But if it's a communications internship with an organization that you're passionate about, do it. And then come talk to me about doing it for credit. Similarly, if you're looking for a community of peers, you're looking for the good work, you're looking for ways to get engaged. If you haven't been on Sun Devil Sync, please make sure that you check out Sun Devil Sync and the opportunities and the organizations that are available to you. Online students, this is for you too. Just because you're not here in the state doesn't mean there's not an organization waiting to welcome you. And if there's not an organization, form the organization. And you can do that right here at ASU. And that was, I'll set my advising hat aside and again say thank you so much, Dr. Sara Suhail, Mr. DeAndre Augustus, almost doctor. We are so grateful for your time and have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much, Seda. Really, thank you for organizing this. Thank you,
Thank you.
DeAndre. Thank you, everybody
Thank
who
you.
joined.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That was great. Thank you so much. Bye,
Good
friends.